team with you? Is it Tom Cheesman?
Tom,
Yeah, Tom's here, great. They're going to tell us about the Morvis project.
Okay, I'll use my time as well. Yeah, I'll start and then I'll ask you questions.
Okay.
So happy Monday, everyone. Thanks for inviting me here. I thought it would be fun to start off with the birth of CODAH, actually, because this is directly a result of the birth of CODAH. And I hope I get it correct. Please correct me. I'm basing this off of memory that's 10 years old now. So about 9-ish years ago, I think it was 2010, I'm not sure, but Tom Cheesman, who is sitting over there, sends me an email saying, like, I would like to meet up and discuss an idea. You know, is that possible? And I said, yes, of course, come stop by, I'm in room. I've already forgotten what my office was, 508 Faraday Tower. I believe it was 508 Faraday Tower. I didn't know what the conversation was going to be about. I just knew it was Tom and he was from the Arts and Humanities. By the way, I'm from the Department of Computer Science and I work on data visualization. So Tom knocks on the door, I open the door, I had never seen him before. He comes in, he's taller, he's very intimidating.
That was Ben.
And sits down. And it's kind of a therapy, it's almost like a therapy setting because it's not just Tom. Like, I open the door and I say, okay, please come in and tell me your problems. Because that's basically what it is. And the problems are usually related to data, right? Because that's my area, data visualization. Like, tell me your data problems. So Tom says, I collect translations, because I'm tired, I collect translations of Shakespeare's Othello into German. And I've been doing so for a number of years, not just collections of Shakespeare's Othello into German, but other things too, like other German translations, and but a special focus on Shakespeare. And the biggest, I think the biggest collection of Othello. So that was like the focus. And I said, okay, that's interesting. And he said, I wonder if data visualization can help me study and understand these translations and how they relate to one another. Specifically, can data visualization help me see which passages are translated in a stable fashion, like consistently over time, and which ones vary, say, wildly or are the most unstable? And my initial reaction was, no. I'm sorry. I can't help you. Because this was the first time I like text visualization in the data visualization field started in around 2005. That's in the way I see it in my mind. And I knew that there were a number of people, a growing collection of people looking at text as a data source and a visualization source. But I had not tried that yet and had not really thought about that yet. So this was the first time somebody was saying, please design some data visualizations that focus on text and natural language. And that is very different very different than what I'm used to, which is numbers. I'm used to things like computational fluid dynamics, all numbers. Molecular dynamics visualization, all numbers. Anything quantifiable, like we had some collaboration with marine biology, and they have the sensors that they attach to animals. Everything numeric up to that point in my life. So I had to shift gears and start to think in a different way to come up with some innovation related to text visualization. And this isn't just text visualization either. This is translation data and comparing translations with one another. And Tom collected more than 30 translations of Shakespeare's Othello into German. And there are more than 50 of them. And just that alone is quite an accomplishment to collect those. So is anybody curious to see what that is going to look like, actually? I hope so. So I have no slides. This is a demo video instead. Yeah. So I will pause the demo video sometimes to try to explain what is happening. And 10 years later, we finally have something to show. So this is the work from actually Mohammed Alharbi, who is working in the computer science department, writing his degree, PhD degree in data visualization. So we are working on some software, some data visualization software, and it follows the so-called visualization mantra. Right? This is, whenever you have a data set, you want to see an overview first. You want to provide selection and filtering options, and then original data details on demand. So that's kind of what this is saying. Overview, an options panel, and details on demand, and then some fancy comparison metrics. How do we compare text with one another, so to speak? And it's such an interesting project, actually. I never got bored of this. So what we're seeing now, this is the overview, and every parallel strip is a translation of Shakespeare's Othello into German. And what Tom did is he aligned the texts. That means he took one translation and then mapped or semi-manually the correspondence of each speech from one translation to another translation. So somebody still has to do that in a semi-manual way. Each rectangle represents a speech in the play. And those rectangles have different colors, and I'll try to explain those. And actually, it's hard to see, but the rectangles have edges between them. So this is one translation, this is another translation, and so on. And I believe they are in chronological order by default. So this is a translation from the early 1900s, and this is the translations from around 2000. The edges show correspondence between the speeches. So if Tom says this translation matches with this one, then he makes a correspondence between them. And he does this, all the correspondences or alignments are done in a semi-manual way. And that's the overview. The color, in this case, is mapped to distinctiveness, right? So areas, that's something we also call a segment or a speech, or the terminology is a little bit confusing. And we can't see details right now unless we use the tooltip. Now, if the user clicks on any speech, then the speech itself is highlighted, and the manual alignment is highlighted, the corresponding segments of all the other translations. And immediately, the odd translations, we don't even have to interact, actually. Some of the strange translations stick out immediately, like this is a strange translation. And we can see some passages that are very stable, and some translators that are very artistic or kind of mavericks. in their approach to translating.
Well, I think it's the case in this view that the darker the colour, is this right? The darker the colour, the more different that translation is from others.
That's right. That's right.
So in some the dark segments that you're looking at, all the translators are doing something. They're interpreting differently, and in the light colour ones, they're more or less more similar. That's an algorithmic analysis of how different the chunks of text are.
Exactly. It gets confusing because there are lots of user options. This is a very feature-rich piece of software, and the color mapping can be selected by the user to mean different things. The color can be mapped to different things. Now it has this special feature, the zooming feature, so you can literally zoom in on the translations and see the original text, and you can still have the same kind of interactions. So the user can zoom in and see the original text if they want to, which is actually very, very unusual. That is a very unusual property of this system. The typical case is overview in one window and the detailed view in a separate window, and the user has to cognitively integrate the two. This is the selection and filtering options, so if the user searches for a specific term, they can do so in a search function box, and then the search term becomes the focus of the overview, as we saw in that little clip. These are different color maps, so if we want to change the color maps, we can do so. And the text, in this case, is color mapped to segment length, right, which is not that exciting. Or speech length is another one. This is the eddy and vid values. Eddy and vid values are a quantitative measure of distinctiveness. So if something is very unusual or distinctive, if there's a rogue translator or a wild translator, that kind of color mapping is going to emphasize those unstable passages that Tom was originally interested in. These are lots of different user options in terms of the ordering of the translations. They can be in chronological order, but they can also be ordered by different levels of distinctiveness, for example. And the user can click on any translation and shift it to a different position. That's also an option. Or just remove a translation if they're interested. That's the user playing with some of the user options and then taking a screenshot to look at later, like this is what I did. Now I want to save the results of my exploration. I will take a screenshot and then as part of my analysis. That's a list of all the different actors and characters in Othello. So if we want to focus on a specific character in Othello, we can do that in the user options panel. This is a time-oriented overview of all the translations. They're represented as thumbnails, so the user can drag and drop these thumbnails back and forth to either add translations or remove translations. Right, that's an add all and remove all button. But if the user is interested in just having a specific number, they can click on that and just get the 6 special translations. So those were overviews and filtering and subset selection options, and then of course we have the detailed analysis options. So what can we provide the user in terms of details? Is my timer? Oh, I forgot to actually set my timer.
About 4 minutes.
4 minutes, okay. We won't need all that. So if the user gets sort of lost in a complex exploration or analysis process, we have this option to save provenance data. That means the history of all the user interaction that they've undergone up until that point, because it's easy to get lost, right? And they can save their provenance data. And they can also select a passage and the corresponding translations in a detailed view. And they can save that detailed view. Maybe they've done a few filtering and subset selections, and now they found an interesting speech, and they want to save it to a file, for example, after a long exploration and analysis process. They have that option to do so. So now we've mapped color to text similarity. I won't go into details about the text similarity metrics, but you just have to trust me that they exist. You can come up with objective measures for text similarity. This is us sitting and actually working together. It's evidence that computer scientists and arts and humanities people can sit in the same room and actually work together. This is something different, especially for the arts and humanities. This is something we call parallel coordinates, which I won't go into very much detail. But each axis is the same as an axis in Cartesian coordinate space, except every axis is vertical. There's no horizontal. Well, there is a horizontal, but the focal axes are all vertical in this case. And terms that are unusual, each axis represents a translation, and the user can choose a specific term, and then the uniqueness of that term is mapped to the height of each axis. So if I see a term like Schwarz or black or something, and I click on it, and there's one translator that uses it in an unusual way, it sticks up out of the crowd, so to speak. So it's used to find outliers amongst lots of words and lots of different translations, because outliers are very interesting for Tom, right? The weird translations. This is a list of terms, and how we come up with that list is arbitrary, but we can use a concordance, for example, like the most frequently used words, or the inverse of a concordance, the least frequently used words, or the user can choose what words they want to focus on. Okay, I'm going to stop there.
So do we have questions for Paul and Tom?
Yeah. I have two questions for both speakers, for Rob. So this clearly you can see how it applies to German-English translation. Does this model apply to other language translation? The question for Tom is, because this data comes from your collection of the German translation, I assume this translation was done by people without computer assisted. In the future, when computer is used more and more in assisting translation, do you think the text will be more stabilized, or is actually could be lost a bit style or creativity?
Interesting question. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. What was the first question?
Does this apply to other languages?
Oh yes, of course. It does definitely apply to other. The bottleneck in this work is the alignment process itself, I would say. So Tom had to do a lot of manual labor to say, okay, I have one translation, I have another translation. Now I have to tell the computer the correspondence between speeches. Like a person still has to intervene and do that. Another holy grail is, can we get an algorithm to find the correspondence and the alignments automatically, or at least semi-automatically, or at least accelerate that painful manual process. But other than that, the same principles apply to the other languages. Yeah.
You've tried on other languages?
We haven't actually tried it on other languages, actually, but I can't imagine any special barriers why it wouldn't work. Yeah.
It's probably worth mentioning that this project split into two at a certain stage. So Bob and his students working on this interface, which has kind of now reached this stage. In the meantime, I got some money separately and worked with another couple of people. We have a web-based application that facilitates, it supports alignment and segmentation of multiple translations against source text, and then it runs various kinds of analysis and allows you to visualize them. That's called BVD. And that works, that's completely language neutral, so that's being used with Chinese, Hebrew, Russian, etc. All kinds of, more or less any language pair.
That's at delightedbeauty.org?
Yeah,
the URL?
Yeah, if you go to delightedbeauty.org, that's accessible there. It has a lot of glitches, it's basically a prototype, you need help if you want to work it. The other question about the future of translation is a very interesting one. If translators all start using machines, then the way things stand, their translations are all going to come out the same. Because, well, there's some difference in which corpora of language different machines are using. So Google and Bing and so on are using different corpora to some extent, but they tend to be the same. But people translating Shakespeare tend not to use machines very much. What they do tend to do is use previous translations in their language. And this is what this sort of thing is trying to pick up, is this retranslation of the process of rewriting, repeating, going back to another version, but then doing something original as well. Translators kind of have to do something original to have success, but they also can't do, well, it depends.
But it would be fun, in a sense, to compare the human translations with the machine translations. Mm-hmm. That would be a fun exercise. Yeah.
One more. That's. Yeah.
So I have a question which is directed at Tom, but Rob might want to come into this. I'm interested in the distinction between data visualization as a mode of presentation of research and data visualization as a research tool. So I wondered if Tom feels that this tells him something he didn't already know, having done the labour of the manual labour.
Absolutely, definitely, yeah. Interpreting the results is difficult because, if I'm interested in identifying, so the initial thought was this idea of identifying which are the difficult bits, or the contentious bits that translate. And it turns out, of course, exactly how you design your algorithms. First, to identify what is different between two translations, or 3 or 40 translations, and then to map the metric of difference back onto the source text. There's a huge element of arbitrariness in that. So the way that you set, so we've actually got on the web application, we've got 4 or 5 different metrics, which will give me 4 or 5 completely different results. So it's raised a lot of questions, but certainly, yeah, I've discovered features of these Othello translations in particular. I'm quite a lazy person. I was not ever going to read 40 different translations of Othello and try and keep in my head how are they different from one another. So it's revealed a lot of really interesting stuff. Yeah.
Thank you.
In my way, going north to south and east to west, visit a new state every day. I put my foot to the floor and I drove on faster, never knowing life so free. I swore to myself that my whole life's me was irresponsibility.